Okay, so in the process of costume design, once the designer meets with the director to get the concept, researches the play, analyzes the play, and studies it, the next phase is the sketches. These are often called rough sketches or thumbnail sketches because they're like the size of a thumbnail. The emphasis on this is not pretty art or even good drawing. It's just a communication tool to show the director what you are thinking in terms of design. So Becky's going to talk to us a little bit about this phase.
Okay. Yeah, these are the rough sketches that I did. And so these roughs were only done for the main characters in the show. I did not do roughs for every character. The ensemble people, I dealt with at a later time. And some of these, we'll start with, these two rows were the rough sketches for Audrey's costumes. We had been working on the idea of an arm sling turning into an apron. This was also very rough at the beginning in terms of how we were going to be able to do that. I had gone back to, like I said, to this chart from way back and figured out how much time she had off stage and whether or not the changes were going to happen and what we could do to make things happen. This scene, the last scene, she's in a nightgown, that we could put a trench coat over it right beforehand. The scene before that would take care, there's not very much time. And then that way that could be on underneath it and nobody would know any better. And some things like that were happening with her. The Ronettes were a little harder to figure out. They changed clothes pretty much every time they left the stage. So while they start out as these street urchins and then had a slow progression until the very end when they are all glammed up and looking great. And like I said, here's the infamous jacket of the research. It shows up there at the very end. What ended
up with the collar,
with the collar, yeah. What ended up happening in the end was both of these costumes did get cut just because of once they got in rehearsals and started working out who was going to be in what scene. Those ended up
the one with the X through
yeah, that one and this one also. In the original script, they have the girls in the dentist scene coming in like dentist, like nurse costumes, and we're not doing it with that. So that got cut, which I'm totally okay with because it was going to be very, very quick to get them in and out of things. These dresses, some of these things were costumes that, like I said, this dress was a dress that I had already found retail, and you can't really tell because it is a rough sketch, but it has a Venus flytrap print fabric. And I'd already located these dresses and wanted to use them, so that got put in as part of the rough sketch. Some of those things were things that we'd already kind of planned on. Like I said, this one at some point I originally thinking about putting Mushtik into a second costume in the first act and got rid of it at that point, just thinking that he didn't need to do that. And then Seymour is sort of by himself. Like I said, in Act 2, he never comes off stage. So, his costume changes were pretty evident from the beginning. This, in Scene 2 of the first act, he comes in carrying the plant, which is a puppet. So this was built into the script as something that we had to do from the beginning. And so, he changes his shirt a couple times. He has a little bit of an upgrade. They all have a little bit of an upgrade because as the show progresses, more money is pouring into the neighborhood or more money is pouring into the florist. And sort of the discussion of how each one of those characters would deal with having an influx of money. The girl group is going to go out and buy themselves really great matching outfits. Seymour, that's not his priority, and he might buy himself a new shirt, but that's about as good as he's going to get. His priority is not buying himself new clothes. So I'm going to flip the phone here. So at the beginning, when we talked about the director's concept, you mentioned the idea of bad choices, and then you talked about how that would manifest itself in clothing choices. Mm-hmm. So can you show us maybe one example of where you applied that in your roughs? Well, I think a lot of it, usually, the most obvious person it would be Audrey for this. Unlike a lot of the other characters, in the show that do have that more 50s silhouette, Audrey appears most of the time wearing very tight clothing. She's still wearing sort of a signature leopard print in a lot of her costume choices, although she does have a bit of a process as she goes through, and her progress, actually, she has this leopard print, which is a thing with her. As she sort of starts to break through, and in like the most obvious symbolism ever, as she starts to fall more and more in love with Seymour, her costume becomes more red. Because we'll just go with the obvious on it. And then in Act 2, after she is with Seymour and the dentist is dead, and she has a fairly drastic change happen where she softens up a lot. She's sort of a hard character that way, and this sort of somewhat trashy clothes and very obviously bleached hair, and she softens up. And then the last costume is a pink. She goes pink and very pastel. Just to kind of show how she softens up. The costumes, the whole show, are supposed to be, with hers, kind of on the tacky side. And they do make reference, she makes reference to, I used to dress bad, not in nice clothes like I have now. And it's supposed to be a joke because at the time she's supposed to be wearing something that looks tacky. Her taste level is just a little questionable. So what happens with the Ronettes, and we'll look at one of their costumes in a minute, is that there's a transition that happens. They slowly start upgrading their things, but then at one point in the show, they get handed a lot of money and they all disappear. And the next time you see them, they are in full-blown girl group outfits. But the taste level is a little questionable on it. I mean, they don't fit in with their sequins and their big hair, and they are what you fear would happen when you handed somebody a lot of money and they don't have particularly good taste. When when that person shows up, at McDonald's wearing a formal dress, and then you're like, yeah, I don't know about this. They have that happen, or when you get all three of them together and they start making some questionable decisions as a group. Also, Mushnik, who's the owner of the flower store, at the top of the show, he's wearing, what at one point was probably a perfectly lovely suit, but he's had it forever. It is the one suit that he owns. He wears it every day. Since he's the owner, though, so he's trying hard to stay with the idea of being a respectable businessman. When the second act rolls around and he has some money, he goes into this full pinstripe, spectator shoes, bow tie. He has himself, completely dressed out. He apparently has decided to invest in a second suit, and he's gone all out with it. And he looks great, but at the same time, it's wavering right on the edge of questionable taste. It's right on the edge of being too much.